Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm resisting the temptation to jump from row to row and give hugs across the rows because I'm seeing people here that I haven't had an opportunity to see for a number of years, as well as our current fellows, as well as some prospective fellows, and it's truly wonderful. In case anybody here doesn't know me, but we also have a broadcast audience, I am Tom Schreier. I've had the privilege, literally the privilege, since the very beginning of this project to be the founding director of the Inspired Leadership Initiative here at the University of Notre Dame. And I will tell those of you that are past fellows or alumni of our program that the essence of our program hasn't changed. It's really to continue to hopefully help to facilitate the discovery, the discernment, and the design of the direction that people want to take when they emerge from the program. And it's really and truly a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And this is the first installment this year in our Inspiring Conversations. It's not something that we did during the first couple of cohorts. It's something that we launched during the pandemic as a way to kind of stay in touch with our various audiences. And this year's theme, as you know, we pick a theme for each year, is leadership in public conversation. And our intent is to really tap into leaders from across various industries and at various ages to talk a little bit about what it means to exhibit leadership in public conversation, something which can be very complicated, I think, in the world that we live in today, but something that I can tell you from having witnessed the cohorts in the Inspired Leadership Initiative program, you all became masters at, despite the fact that you came in with a wide variety of different backgrounds from a wide variety of different geographies. You all really facilitated amazingly powerful conversation, both privately and publicly, which was really powerful. This program is, thankfully, put on and facilitated by ThinkND, which I want to thank the people in the Alumni Association that really helped to facilitate that. And today, I have the great pleasure of welcoming our guest, Bernie Borges. And we're going to discuss reimagining fulfillment at midlife and beyond. Bernie, who I've had the great pleasure of getting to know, and a few of you have also had a chance to get to know, is the host of the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. Like many of you here in the audience, Bernie hasn't spent his entire life focusing on midlife fulfillment. In fact, he spent most of his core career time and continues to spend part of that time in software and technical services, kind of the business-to-business space. He has had a 15-year entrepreneurial span. He's been in corporate leadership roles. He's authored a book, spoke at industry conferences, and now has done something, has really focused his life on podcasting. He's done over 500 podcasts broadly, and the most current and the one he's focused on today and one he's quite passionate about is the Midlife Fulfilled podcast. And that's really channeling his passion to enable men and women over 40 to thrive at this stage in life. And I'm particularly excited to flip the script on Bernie because Bernie normally is the person who's doing the interviewing. So now I have the great opportunity to interview Bernie and to make the interviewer into the interviewee. So I really, really do look forward to that. And Bernie, I just really want to thank you for coming here and for joining us today.
Well, Tom, thank you, and I'm honored to be here.
Well, it's truly a pleasure, and it's been fun spending some time in person together over the course of the past couple of days. So just, starting at the very beginning, what caused you to think, this is a space I want to dive deeply into to focus on the midlife in this podcast that you do?
How much time do we have? So as you know, Tom, I've been podcasting for 10 years. I kind of fell in love with podcasting once I got behind the microphone and started conducting interviews. And most of my podcast shows, this being the fourth one, as you mentioned, have been interview style. And I had this period after I retired the Modern Marketing Engine podcast in 2021 at episode 300. I had this period of not quite a year where I was in between podcasts. So I knew I wanted to do another podcast. And at this stage in my life, I was thinking about this concept of midlife very broadly. And after doing some research on what podcasts are out there on this topic of midlife, I discovered that the vast majority of the podcasts about midlife were hosted by women for women, and there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. But those podcasts were focused on women-only topics. not very many podcasts were broadly speaking to both men and women in this midlife phase. And then I started doing some more research and discovered that no one's talking about one of my favorite F words, and that's fulfillment, right? And so I just decided, because I think we all seek fulfillment. I think universally we can broadly agree that we all seek fulfillment, especially in these stages, these seasons of life. And so that's how I decided to settle on the Midlife Fulfilled podcast.
So I think it probably makes sense for the benefit of our audience to talk about how you define midlife, right? Because it can be broadly defined. So how do you define midlife?
Well, Tom, I'll begin by saying what midlife is not, okay? Because I find that the most common perception of midlife by most people is that they think that midlife is their midpoint in life. And I can very easily refute that concept, because does anybody know what their date of death is? And that's not a morbid concept, because the death rate is 100%. If you don't believe me, Google it.
Yeah.
But nobody knows their death date, which means you can't define your midpoint. So I define midlife, and by the way, I've done some anecdotal research on this, and there really isn't a universally accepted, scientifically acclaimed definition of midlife. Broadly speaking, what I've read is that between age 35 and 75 is this big span of age. But I define midlife as basically 3 stages: early midlife, mid-midlife, and late midlife. And in general terms, it's 40s and 50s for early midlife, 50s and 60s for mid-midlife, and then beyond 60, 70 and beyond for late midlife. And the only thing that comes after midlife, Tom, is end of life. And I don't mean your death date. I mean a season of life, which happens for many people, where you just begin a decline that does end in your end, right? So that's how I broadly define midlife.
So I was recently at a reunion, and at that reunion, they defined midlife for this stage in life as having 3 different components. Go-go, which is the early part, slow-go, which is the middle part, and no-go, which is the latter part. So I don't know if you'd categorize it that way, but I thought, wow, that's pretty good. I just don't want you to attach an age to when they move into those different zones. So let's talk. Fulfillment's a big part. I mean, you've already mentioned the word. It's something that's really central. It's something that attracted us, I think, to the way that you kind of talk to this space. But you have this framework around before fulfillment and after fulfillment, and I think at some level that gets to the ethos of what we're trying to do with the Inspired Leadership Initiative. So talk a little bit about that and how you would define it and how meaningful it is to you.
Yeah, I call it BF to AF, right? Before fulfillment to after fulfillment. And so we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Well, I've defined, the 5 pillars of midlife. And they are health, fitness, and I make a distinction between health and fitness, career, which is where we spend the most amount of our time, relationships, and legacy. And legacy is about the impact you want to have on the world. So I really look at fulfillment as attempting to touch each one of those pillars. And at the end of every podcast episode, with no exception, I have a closing line at the end of every episode. I say, if you're 80% fulfilled, you're doing great. And if you think about those 5 pillars, I think very few of us can say that we are 100% fulfilled across all 5 of those pillars. Okay, again, health, fitness, career, relationships, and legacy. So those pillars are not as prevalent early in life, because as you've pointed out, early in life we're kind of focused on building careers, families, that sort of thing. It's as we mature and we go through these midlife seasons that we can really begin about the importance of our health, the importance of being fit, the importance of having a meaningful and purposeful career, the importance of all the relationships in our life, and then the importance of having an impact in this world.
And if you think about those 5 different pillars, are there any kind of, or even any of the other work that you've seen and done through the podcast, are there any kind of common threads or different kind of arcs that you see, like, at certain ages, there's a different level of fulfillment on the health or the fitness side or on the relationship side, or is it different by individual?
So it's yes and yes, meaning it certainly is unique to each one of us, right? Because we all have our unique circumstances and struggles. And I think the common thing is the struggle part. I think all of us, to some extent, have had some struggle in our midlife seasons, whether it's health-related or career-related. A very common one is career. And a very common one is, I went to school for X, I did that career for 20, 30, 40 years, and I woke up one day and said, okay, I've done this for 30 years, now what? Right? And that's a very common one, Tom, where people are struggling with, I've had accomplishments, I've had success, but I'm not fulfilled. I'm looking for something else. And it's not always limited to career. A lot of times it's just the legacy part. Even though they may not use the word legacy, they're thinking about, what can I do to just have a bigger impact on my family, my community, whatever it may be, beyond just the 30 years of being whatever they were in their vocation.
So I think that's a really nice bridge because, as you know, given the time you spent with us, that's a big part of what we try to really zero in on and focus on the context of the Inspired Leadership Initiative here at Notre Dame. So you've had the opportunity to interview 5 of our fellows in depth. So just give us all some perspective on what you've heard there, what some of the thoughts are that you've seen emerge from those interviews.
I'd be happy to. First of all, I've had the privilege of interviewing 5 ILI alum, with the 5th one being this morning with Dr. Juliana. A couple of common threads. One is this struggle concept that I mentioned, where everyone was struggling with being at a certain point in their current midlife season, and they were struggling with something, looking for that next thing. Right. The other was, or is, a willingness to have what you call a broad aperture. I love that metaphor that you use when you and I, by the way, if you haven't listened to my interview with Tom, episode 64, I encourage you to listen to that episode. And in that conversation that we had, Tom, you used the word aperture. And I think another common theme is the ILI alum that I spoke to were willing to have this open aperture, this broad aperture, and willing to come into the program to explore. And then the third one is that they were willing to explore life transformation. That was another common theme. They didn't come into the program necessarily thinking for a career transformation, but what's next for them in life, to really sort of rediscover who they are. You know, this concept of self-discovery at this point in life, because it's not uncommon for us to be in this season of life and wake up one day and say, who am I? And for some people, the answer was, I'm an accountant, I'm an attorney, you know, I'm an educator, right? But that's not necessarily answering the question, who am I? And a common thread was people wanting to discover that.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to hear you say that, because that is a big part of what we talk about as it relates to this program, is that it isn't as much about what an individual does, but it's who they are, right? It is how they identify themselves, and not only who they are, but also, you know, kind of who they want to be and how they want to identify themselves at the next stage. And I think, you know, to your comment on stages before, and some of you have probably heard me say that, I think a lot of us think of ourselves, you know, as a kid, and then as a parent, and our identity gets very wrapped around those things, or as a doctor, or as a lawyer, or as a business person. But, you know, at a certain stage in life, and I think it's sometime in that midlife span, that a lot of those identities don't work anymore, right? And you kind of go, what's my identity going to be, right? And so, you know, you've interviewed over 200 people, right, in the context of your work. Talk a little bit about that identity question, and maybe about some of the answers people have come up with that could be beneficial to our audience.
So I'll give you an example. One of the podcast episodes that I did on the Midlife Fulfill podcast was an accomplished woman who owns her own business, specifically in sales training. And when she opened her business, she was really focused on evangelizing and being an advocate for women in sales. She is a woman of color, so she especially wanted to advocate for women of color in sales. She has built a very successful business, Tom. She's extremely well known. She gets invited to speak often in many places, and she's quite accomplished. And when we came onto the podcast for the conversation, on a BF to AF episode, asking her to kind of speak to the before fulfillment to after fulfillment, I was expecting for her to speak about her career journey, her success in her business. She didn't mention it. What she spoke about was that while she was busy in her career, she didn't have time to start a family. And she had always envisioned as a young lady that she would one day be a mom and have a family. And she woke up one day in her 50s and realized that's not going to happen. Well, not long ago, she got married, and she's happily married, but she's beyond the stage of life of having a family. But what she realized, Tom, is that her sister, who has a daughter, who is obviously her niece, she gets great fulfillment by being an aunt to her niece. And that level of fulfillment is so much more than her accomplishments, her business accolades, anything and everything associated with her career accomplishments is secondary to her being an aunt to her niece.
So do you find that your guests, when you do the before fulfillment and after fulfillment, have clarity around, like it sounds like she has clarity around what triggered that sense of fulfillment in their life? Do you feel like most have a clarity around what triggered fulfillment, or are many in search of a trigger for fulfillment?
More are in search of than have the clarity. And that's more common than uncommon, is being in search of that clarity, because it's not something that most of us can find on our own.
And if you think about, I mean, that's a great story. I'd love to hear, are there other stories that just really stand out from the 200 episodes that you've done that, you know, are something that just kind of really helps to, because that to me is a very powerful story about how somebody, in a very kind of surprising way, and I think for a lot of our fellows that have been in the program, it's been the same thing. And despite meaningful accomplishments that didn't necessarily get them to the point of fulfillment or, you know, flourishing, as we use actually in the context of the class that we have, that didn't get them there. It's something else that needs to get there. So are there other stories you can think of that of people that have defined what brings them fulfillment in ways that may not be what we typically think? Because you said yourself,
sure,
you walked into that.
I'm full of those stories, Tom, with 125 episodes under my belt. So one other that comes to mind is a fellow named Kurt out in California, successful Silicon Valley sales executive, grew up through the sales ranks, worked in technology companies, made his money, became an entrepreneur, a solo entrepreneur, did that for about a dozen years, had modest success with that, but then reached a point where he just felt like, I've done this. So at some point, what he realized through a friend who works for the local tourism bureau, this is in Sonoma County, California, his local friend in the tourism bureau said, Kurt, why don't you come to work for us in the tourism bureau? By the way, no stock options in the tourism bureau, right? And just be a business development representative advocating for our area for tourism. Well, what he said, Tom, was he said, I had to put my ego aside because he had 30 years of technology, sales, accolades, success, money, all that. He said, I had to put my ego aside and accept that. He says, it's the best thing that I've done in recent memory. He said, I'm having a ball. I love what I do, and I'm totally fulfilled.
So before we move to questions, I'm going to ask a question I didn't tell you I was going to ask, but I think this might be kind of fun. So I'm going to ask it anyway. Where are you on the BF to AF spectrum? And talk a little bit about, you know, how the podcast has fit for you.
Sure. Well, as David Tank said on, I think it was episode 112, and I know David's not with us here in the room, that is. So David is one.
We're not making an announcement.
Right. He said that he is a work in progress, and I said I'm a member of that same club. I'm a work in progress, and actually I was just having a similar conversation before outside in the hall. I realized how much I thoroughly enjoy conducting interviews. I love it. I really do. I feel like that is almost a calling of mine, right? So I get tremendous fulfillment from that. And so I'm going to continue to do that and then see where this journey takes me.
And so so you're a work in progress. Has it advanced you though along that spectrum? Do you think? Well, because you in some ways I think aren't dissimilar from Kurt or others. Your traditional career, been successful, been in technology, been in B2B. If I were you, and if I'm you and I'm interviewing you, is there a kind of a breakthrough that you feel like doing this podcasting has provided you that's getting you on this road to fulfillment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's given me clarity on an aspiration that I have. Okay. I would like to put on events where a room that's 3 times this size, maybe 5 times this size, with 1,000 people in the room across the span of 2 days, across topics with speakers on those 5 pillars, Tom. And where those events are providing meaningful, useful, purposeful information and education and inspiration to the people who come and attend those events. That would give me tremendous fulfillment.
Good, wonderful. Well, why don't we open it up for questions? Any questions? Wait for the microphone is the only thing that I can say. Joe will be our mic guy. We know he's quick and agile and plays tennis better than most of us. So, Connell. Oh, sure, way on the other side. Yeah, he's gonna come through the door and he'll be with you in a second. All right.
Hi, everyone. My name's Conal Fagan. I'm a class of 2021 grad. I wanted to ask you a question about kind of like your foundation. So you talk about the pillars and kind of those different aspects of your life, but what happens when things don't go to plan, when things don't go the right way? What are the foundations that you have that kind of root you and keep you grounded and continue to give you that perseverance when times are tough?
Thank you for the question. It starts with my faith. So I lean on my faith, and I just prayerfully consider the situation, and then just leave it in God's hands. And then I go hit my fist into the wall to remind myself that I'm a human. Meaning, I'm going to balance things out with human things like talking to a friend, but I will start with prayer first. And just try to get some guidance, some spiritual guidance on, some direction that I need to be considering. And remind myself that, life is this journey that's a roller coaster that has ups and downs. And so that would be, my approach. That is my approach.
Hi. Hello. My name's Beth Weber, and I'm in cohort number 5. Thank you so much for coming to speak. I've always wanted to be a podcaster, but I will talk to you about that afterwards. But I'm interested in your pillars because I'm sure Teresa has the same question. What is the difference between fitness and health, briefly, because they seem one and the same? So I'm asking that for myself and Teresa back there.
Sure. Thank you, Beth. That's a great question, and thank you for asking that. Well, most of us, when we're asked about our health, we immediately think and respond to that question about our physical health, when in fact our health is comprised of both physical and mental. And then mental is part emotional as well. So it's such a big bucket that I distinguish between the two. One reason that I distinguish between health and fitness is that, unfortunately, in the US, and I can only speak to the US in terms of this data point, in the US, 60% of Americans in adult years don't exercise, 60%. And that can have a significant impact on both physical health, mental health, and even just the ability to function. If you get on an airplane and you struggle putting your luggage up above the rack, right? Or if you're going to the grocery store and you struggle with groceries, or if, like, I recently helped my son move, and fortunately I was able to help him without any problem. So just being functional is tied to fitness, and health is both physical and mental. And we live in an age now where we're finally able to talk about the importance of mental health, and it is vitally important to focus on having good mental health. That's why I break out the two.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, Paul.
Paul Morlock from cohort 4, and I want to stay on what you were talking about regarding pillars, because I was curious with this gentleman's question back here about when he said, what do you do when things don't go wrong? And your first response was to say, I pray. So there's a spiritual aspect there, which did not come out in your pillars. And so I'm wondering if there was some thought given to that, or how does that fit? Because obviously it does fit for you. So have you found that with others over the course of the podcast that you've done?
Spiritual is in the relationship pillar. Because when I pray, I'm in relation to God.
So maybe while he's bringing it down, so do you view that as kind of an explicit subset of, so there are kind of subsets to these
Exactly.
different pillars.
These are big topics, right? So relationship is certainly relationship with God. Now, for anyone who's an atheist, well, their relationship is with atheism, right? So whatever their theism is, that's a relationship, right? But then there's all the other relationships with, family, coworkers, community, et cetera, right? There's many subdivisions of relationship. But specific to your question, Paul, that's where I put faith, is under relationship.
Terry.
Not being shy, I wanted to bring in another study, which is the study of the Harvard class of, I don't remember what it was. It was John Kennedy's class. Terry vote, cohort 1. I guess we're 2019 is what we're called. So this particular study followed Harvard students through their whole lifetime at 5-year intervals. And they really wanted to track what were the factors that led to a fulfilling life. And they came up with, and by the way, I think that study is still going on. They had to pick another class or something. And they're on their third director. And he came up, the first guy, came up with 3 things that made sense, that made a difference. And the first was health, but not bifurcated the way you do it. The second, interesting enough, was spirituality. And the third was something about on the lines with your last one, but he called it generativity, which has to do with giving back to younger people and mentoring. So for one of my high school reunions, I put together sort of a cafe chat where I divided people into tables of 3. And out of that, we actually did a formal study to try to figure out, in our group, at that point, we were probably 70-year-olds, what made people more happy. We came up with something completely different. Having a short commute and having a daughter.
So I'm moderately familiar with that study. I've read something about it, and there's a couple of thoughts that I have on it, Terry. One is, I'm really fascinated by the distinction between being happy and being fulfilled. When Notre Dame football wins, I'm happy, but it's a fleeting moment. The next day, which is in most cases Sunday, I'm on to that day, and I may or may not still feel happy. I mean, I'm happy that they won the day before, but the point is that happiness is something that oftentimes can be not terribly deep within us, where I believe fulfillment is within our soul. It is something you can't take away from me, even if I'm in pain, physical pain, emotional pain, or in the moment, unhappy. You can't take away that fulfillment. There's another study, and by the way, one criticism that I've heard about that study from Harvard is because of the socioeconomic class of Harvard students is that it's limiting to a universe of people that were Harvard graduates, right? There's another study that was conducted by the National Bureau of Economic Research, you may have heard about it, called the U Happiness Curve, right? Published in 2020, roughly 4 years ago. That study studied 132 countries, people in 132 countries. And the reason it's called the happiness U curve, and the U is the letter U, not the word U, is because it determined that across 132 countries, we are generally happiest, we meaning humans in 132 countries, are generally happiest at age 18 at the top of the U curve. We become then consistently less happy until age 47.2. That's what the study says. Then we begin climbing up the other side of the U-curve and get happier and happier and happier and kind of peak at around age 70, give or take, right? But again, I still come back to the difference between happiness and fulfillment. I believe that fulfillment is soul deep, and that's why I'm focused on it, because I think it's just something that universally every human being wants fulfillment.
So I would just add a little something there, because as many of you know, in addition to the class that Steve and I did, Designing an Inspired Life, Steve, myself, and a few others, including Joe, instrumentally do this class now called Life Design, the Art and Science of Human Flourishing. And so we spend a lot of time around these kinds of topics. And one thing that emerged yesterday in the context of class, which came from the Book of Joy, which is the book that comes from when Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama got together and had this phenomenal joy-filled discussion, was that the way, and this gets to your generativity point, but it's just, I think, framed differently. The way out of suffering and pain is to show compassion, not to be shown compassion. But it was fascinating, right, when we kind of stepped back in the context of the class and said, wow. And here are two people who have every reason to understand pain and suffering, given what they've gone through with the Tibetan people and in South Africa. And they said their way out of so I think, what you begin to see in this whole space, whether it's an Arthur Brooks or it's Desmond Tutu or Dalai Lama or the studies out of Harvard or all these different things, is that that a lot of it has to do with conscious acts, right? Acts that actually individuals choose to take to get them into a place of, and it is true, right? Happiness. The problem with words like happiness, joy, and fulfillment and stuff, that you almost kind of have to self-define them. I think your definition of fulfillment is probably, fulfillment's a great word, right? Because I think people will get the depth there. But a lot of people use happiness for that or joy for that. But I found that to be really, really powerful. And it's something we spend a lot of time in. And now, for the benefit of our current fellows and future fellows, we'll translate it for them. For the others, you've probably figured it out all by yourselves, because that's just the way you always have been. Lou, wait one second for the mic, because there will be people. Yeah.
That's fine. Can everyone hear me?
Well, no, we've got people on. Yeah,
Oh,
we got
I'm
people
sorry.
on. Yeah.
What you've been talking about, is fulfillment. And fulfillment, as in your definition, or the way you were looking at it, it seems as though it's something that you're trying to create yourself and putting all your energy into being fulfilled. Where, Tom, when you mentioned joy, I was actually going to talk a little bit about joy, because with joy happens to you because you're trying to do something. Your energy is placed in trying to do something for other people. Someone else, and for all intents and purposes, that creates a sense of joy in you. So one is directed, by us for us, and the other one is directed by us for other people.
Yeah, I'll just mention that Eric Weichert, who just joined us, I had the privilege of interviewing Eric on episode 120. And Eric, I'm sure you don't mind me saying this because you shared it on the podcast for the world to hear, and that is, Eric came out of this program realizing that his purpose and what he desires most is to create joy. That's what he's about, is creating joy. And that is, if I may put words in your mouth, Eric, that fulfills him, right? So if creating joy is something that you're intent on, as Eric is, and I'm sure many others, that gives us a sense of fulfillment. Because remember, fulfillment is soul level deep. You can't take that away from someone. So the act of creating joy creates that fulfillment. So they're synonymous for sure.
Yeah, I would just add, I'm like so steeped in this other stuff, I just kind of can't help myself. And I think it plays off so much, because you said it's the act of creating joy. And there's another concept that we talk about a lot in the context, which is flow. And the act, you can never force yourself into joy, right? You can't do it. You have to do acts which may lead to joy with others and then bring joy back to you. It's no different than in the fellows that have been in the program know we talk about flow in the context of the program. It's the same there, right? That's the beauty of concepts like this. You can do things that create the conditions for flow, but you don't know what it's going to be that's going to trigger you into it. So you end up needing to do a lot of different things in order to find yourself.
And what I find, both through just people on my podcast as well as the alum that I've spoken to here through ILI, is that people want to give themselves the opportunity to discover where they can find that flow, where they can find their joy, where they can find their fulfillment, their purpose.
Right. And it isn't a one-shot deal, right? I think that is. It's certainly what we've discovered, right? I think all of those of you that have been a part of the program, we talk about, just try it, try different hypotheses, right? And I'm sure you've seen with the people that have been in your podcast, they haven't just said, okay, this didn't bring me fulfillment, now I'm going to do this, and oh, good, I'm batting 1,000. I'm guessing most people don't bat 1,000.
That's right. That's right.
So, all right, Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Lawton from Cohort 3. I retired in 2020 in the midst of COVID, and I've done a lot of introspection since then, which led me to the ILI, which has created even more introspection into my life. What I have found in trying to decipher what I've done in my life is I find that I have had moments of false fulfillment, where I told myself or lied to myself or just talked myself into believing that I was fulfilled. And then as I analyze each part of my life, I realize I was happy, but I wasn't fulfilled. I was looking for fulfillment, maybe found 5 minutes of it, and then it was gone. And COVID did something in my brain where it made me realize you have to have time to find fulfillment. I can't find fulfillment if I'm dedicating 40 or more hours of my week working for somebody else who doesn't care if I'm fulfilled or not. So how many people have you spoken to that have had that realization that in order to find fulfillment or chase fulfillment, you have to dedicate time to it and you have to put aside what you've done in your past and look for something in your future, even if you don't know what that might be?
Yeah, Anna, that's a very insightful question. And what I think it comes down to, on my experience interviewing people on the podcast, is one thing, and that is taking the time and putting the energy into asking yourself the following question. What are my values? What are my values at this point in life? And I don't mean the kind of values that are instilled in you as a young child that are with you forever. I mean the values that are the things that are most important to you now at this point in my life. And a lot of people don't go through that exercise. And when people go through that exercise, the two examples that I shared, right? Cynthia, the successful businesswoman, and Kurt, the successful sales executive, asked themselves, what's important to me right now? And then they were able to answer that question by giving it a lot of thought, a lot of introspection. And then, as a result of that, make decisions that would fulfill them because they had clarity on their values. They had clarity on what's important to them now. And the old Simon Sinek, if you're familiar with Simon Sinek, start with why. Once you define that why, that gives you the clarity to be able to self-discover what it is that you're looking for.
All right. We'll take these two questions, and then I think we need to wrap up.
Good afternoon, Bob Lees from Cohort 5. Maybe tacking on to what you just said, how durable do you find fulfillment is for people who have found it? Or have you seen people kind of need to go through the process several times as they go through life's arc?
So in my experience, and I'm not a clinical psychologist, so I have to preface my response with that, But in my experience, just anecdotally, because that's what it is. It's anecdotes, right? I'm interviewing people on my podcast. They're anecdotes. They're stories. My experience that it's pretty durable because they come to a realization at this stage in life. They're not coming to this realization at age 30. They're coming to this realization usually over 50, in some cases over 60. And when they come to some realization, like the two examples that I gave you, it is a light bulb. And that light bulb stays on. That's been my experience.
Thank you for this song. Thank you for your talk today. I wanted to see if you could dovetail a little bit more on your response to, and I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Anna. You had mentioned earlier that when you chose this new career to podcasts, that you felt a sense of purpose, that you had always, it was almost a vocation in a way. And that led me to think of discernment and how discernment plays a role. And then you mentioned about your faith and how you pray. And I thought that, it also reminded me of your earlier comment about the woman who was very successful, but she found her fulfillment as an aunt in her relationship with her niece. And so I would just wonder if you could just maybe expand on that response in terms of how discernment, your gifts, discerning your gifts and your talents and what you were made for could help someone determine what their next chapter might be.
Yeah. So if I reflect on the aspect of my faith, sometimes God puts neon signs in front of you, you just don't see them. And oftentimes there are people in our life who are those neon signs, who say something to you that just like Teflon, it bounces off you. You don't hear it. And then one day you realize, I've heard that before, and I've heard it more than once. There must be something to that. And so it's not uncommon for us to have that experience where we realize that, maybe I've known for a while that I have this calling, but I just wasn't paying attention to it. This person mentioned it, this person mentioned it, this other circumstance called attention to it, and for some reason, either I ignored it or it just didn't get on my radar, but it's now on my radar. Once it's on your radar, it is there. It's not going anywhere, and your choice is either ignore it or act on it. And that's where the realization that I've come to is like, it's on my radar, I'm not ignoring it, I'm acting.
So when we think of public conversation, right, and you think of a topic that 5 or 10 years ago, people really didn't zero in on, it is this topic of whether you call it joy, you call it fulfillment, or you call it happiness. If you look at major universities across the United States, in almost every case, the single most popular class is around this topic. And I was at my reunion, so at the Harvard Business School, the single most popular class is Arthur Brooks' class on the art and science of happiness. These are a bunch of super driven people who you would think it would be some finance class or something else. He only can serve 180 students a year. There are 1,600 people at the school, 900 of them sign up for that class each year. And what's been beautiful, and thank you, Bernie, for doing this today and coming, about what Bernie does and what we loved about him is he just takes a really great way of looking at a topic, which is a topic that people are talking about today, and brings it to a really wonderfully broad audience and brings it in a way that's relevant for people across gender, across all different dimensions, right, as you stated at the beginning. And that's, other people might you'll find some maybe more traditional definitions of public conversation at different times. We have another wonderful definition of public conversation tomorrow in the context of the discussion that we'll have relating to purpose. But these are things that people are really looking for and that really do get to the heart of public conversation. So I want to thank you for the great work that you do. I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank you for tolerating me as the interviewer when I know you are really a great interviewer at your heart. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Again, it's my honor.